She was only 7 years old, sitting barefoot on a cold park bench, whispering through trembling lips, "It hurts, sir. Please help me." Most people walked past without noticing. But that night, one man stopped, a weary police officer, and beside him, a German shepherd whose instincts never failed. What they discovered was not just a child in pain, but a hidden story of bruises, silence, and a cry for love no one had answered until now. This isn't just about rescue. It's about the bond between a little girl, a faithful dog, and the officer who refused to walk away. And before we begin, tell us, what city are you listening from today? The spring night had settled over Willow Creek, North Carolina, in a blanket of damp air and muted stars. The small town was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic on Highway 23 and the soft croak of frogs that lived along the pond. Through the stillness came the steady hum of a police cruiser, headlights cutting a pale yellow path through the willow trees that leaned over the narrow road. Behind the wheel sat Sergeant Mark Harris, a man of 42, with the kind of face that revealed both discipline and weariness. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the posture of someone who had spent too many nights in uniform. His hair was dark brown with strands of gray creeping in at the temples, cut short in regulation style, but always a little disheveled at the end of his shift. His jawline was sharp, covered by the shadow of stubble that he often forgot to shave after long nights. Mark had the deep-set blue eyes of a man who had seen enough loss to shape him, yet still carried the patience of someone who refused to give up on people. Mark had once been known in the department as the calm one, a steady hand in tense situations, but beneath that reputation lay scars no one saw. Years earlier, on a freezing night, he had been the first responder to a crash on black ice. A minivan had slid off the road. He had tried everything, but a small child hadn't survived. Since then, every call involving children tugged at the part of him he could never quite mend. It was that memory that carved the permanent crease between his brows, as if his face itself remembered the weight of that night. In the passenger seat sat his partner, Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd. Ranger was lean and powerful, weighing close to 80 pounds, with a thick sable and black coat that glistened under streetlights. His wedge-shaped head carried ears always pricked, and his amber eyes scanned everything with quiet intensity. A faint notch marked his right ear, a scar from an old training accident, giving him an air of rugged experience. Ranger was known at the precinct for his discipline during pursuits, but also for his gentleness around children. To suspects, he was intimidating. To kids, he was a silent guardian. Tonight, he sat upright, watching the blur of trees, every muscle poised for purpose. The cruiser rolled to a stop near Birchwood Park, the town's most secluded green space. It was late, past 10, the swings still, the gravel paths wet from an earlier drizzle. Mark stepped out, adjusting his duty belt, and clipped Ranger's reflective lead. "Let's stretch our legs, boy," he murmured. Ranger gave a low huff, tail swaying once, then trotted forward, paws soundless on the damp path. They passed the gazebo where the old groundskeeper sometimes left his tools. A janitor named Bernie, stooped and wiry with a white beard poking from beneath a wool cap, waved as he pushed a squeaky cart. "Evening, officer," Bernie rasped. Mark lifted a hand in greeting. Ranger gave the man a single glance, ears flicking, then turned his focus back to the path. The air grew heavier as they neared the pond. The willow branches dipped low, their shadows swaying like curtains across the stone benches. It was here that Ranger suddenly froze. His entire body stiffened, tail held straight, nose testing the air. Mark felt the tension ripple through the lead. "What is it, buddy?" Mark whispered. Ranger pulled slightly forward, ears locked toward a bench near the water. In the dim light, Mark saw what at first looked like a pile of forgotten clothes. But as he approached, the shape shifted. It wasn't fabric. It was a child. Mark's pulse quickened. He slowed his steps, careful not to startle. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. She sat curled in the corner of the bench, arms wrapped tight around her knees. Her dress was thin, torn at the hem, its once blue fabric faded almost gray. She had no shoes, and her bare feet were dirty, toes red and raw from the cold stone. Blonde hair, tangled and damp, hung across her pale face. The bruises along her arms peeked out from beneath sleeves tugged down too far. She didn't cry, she didn't even shiver. She sat like a statue, too still for a child her age. Mark stopped a few feet away and lowered his voice. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Mark. I'm a police officer. This here is Ranger. He's gentle, I promise. Can I sit over here?" He gestured to the far end of the bench, keeping his hands open and visible. The girl's chin lifted just enough for their eyes to meet. Her gaze was wide and hollow, filled with something that wasn't just fear. It was resignation. Slowly, she gave the faintest nod. Mark eased down onto the bench, leaving space between them. Ranger moved in a slow arc, his profile angled so as not to appear threatening. When he reached the bench, he lowered his head and rested his chin carefully on the stone, inches from the girl's knee. His amber eyes blinked slowly, as if inviting trust. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of willow leaves. Then the girl's lips parted. Her voice was faint, almost swallowed by the night breeze. "It hurts, sir. Please, help me." The words pierced Mark deeper than he expected. His knees nearly buckled where he sat. His chest tightened with a familiar ache, the old memory of a winter's glove flashing in his mind. But this time, he swore the ending would be different. He leaned forward slightly, speaking softly. "We'll help you. You're safe with us." The girl's arms trembled, but she didn't pull away. Ranger, steady as stone, lifted his head a little higher and gently laid it across her lap. The girl flinched at the weight, then slowly, hesitantly, let her small fingers slip into the thick fur at his neck. For the first time that night, her body loosened, just a fraction. And in that fragile silence beneath the willows, beside the duck pond, the bond that would tie their lives together began. The fluorescent lights of the Willow Creek Police Department buzzed softly as the door swung open. Sergeant Mark Harris stepped inside, carrying the fragile weight of a child who had trusted him enough to take her hand. Sophie Allen, 7 years old, clung to him, her thin arms wound tightly around his neck, her cheek buried against his shoulder, as though she could vanish into his uniform. At his side padded Ranger, the German shepherd, walking in perfect rhythm with his handler, amber eyes fixed on the child, as if guarding her from the entire world. The station was not large, just a modest brick building near the courthouse with 3 holding cells, a dispatcher's desk, and the faint smell of coffee that had lived there for decades. Tonight it was quiet, the hour late, the hum of computer screens the only background noise. Behind the front desk sat Deputy Carla Jensen, a woman in her mid-30s with auburn hair tied back in a loose bun. Carla was tall and slender, with a pale complexion dotted by freckles across her nose and cheeks. She had a way of softening the hard edges of the station. Her voice was calm, her eyes kind, and she had a habit of leaving cookies out for the night shift. Years earlier, Carla had nearly left the force after being injured in a domestic call gone wrong. A knife scar ran faintly along her left forearm, a reminder of that night. Instead of breaking her spirit, it gave her an edge of fierce protectiveness, especially for women and children. Her eyes widened when she saw the bundle in Mark's arms. "Good Lord, Mark, is she—" "She's alive," Mark interrupted, his tone even, though his jaw was tight. "Name's Sophie. Needs a quiet space." Carla rose from her chair immediately, pulling keys from her belt. "Come on. The interview room is empty. It's warmer in there." Mark nodded, carrying Sophie down the hallway. Ranger followed closely, tail low, ears flicking at every sound. His body radiated alertness. He was no longer just a patrol dog, but a silent wall between the girl and the rest of the world. They entered a small room painted in dull beige, furnished with a worn couch and a small table where coffee mugs had left the faint circles. Mark set Sophie gently on the couch, crouching to her level. She didn't let go. Her little hands gripped the fabric of his shirt until Ranger stepped forward, nudging her elbow with his nose. Only then did she shift, sliding sideways to wrap her arms around the dog's thick neck, burying her face in his fur as though he were the only safe thing in the world. Mark's chest tightened. He let her cling to Ranger and rose, motioning for Carla to join him by the door. "She's hurt," he said in a low voice. "I need the medic." Carla didn't hesitate. She radioed Dr. Ellen Whitaker, the department's on-call physician. Ellen was a woman in her late 50s, short and round, with silver hair always pinned neatly under a navy cap. Known around town as Doc Witt, she had delivered half the children in Willow Creek and never retired because she claimed she still had fight left in these bones. Her bedside manner was blunt but caring, like a grandmother who refused to let you leave the table without finishing supper. While they waited, Mark kept his eyes on Sophie. She sat pressed into Ranger, her thin body trembling beneath the oversized blanket Carla had brought. She hadn't spoken since the park, not a word, not even her name. Only when Ranger shifted to lick her cheek did she release a faint sigh that sounded almost like relief. Minutes later, the door creaked open and Doc Witt entered, carrying her worn leather medical bag. Her voice was gruff, but gentle. "Where's my patient?" Sophie stiffened at the sound, burrowing deeper into Ranger's fur. Ranger's ears twitched, and he gave a warning rumble, not aggressive, just protective. Mark raised a hand to calm them both. "Doc, she's scared. Take it slow." Ellen crouched a few feet away, lowering herself with the creak of old knees. Her round face softened as she looked at Sophie. "Hey there, sugar. I'm just here to make sure you're okay. I won't touch you unless you want me to." Sophie peeked out with one wary eye, then immediately hid again. Ranger turned his head, licking her hand once as if telling her it was safe. Slowly, Sophie's grip loosened enough for Ellen to see her arm. The doctor's expression hardened as she gently rolled back the sleeve. Bruises in varying stages of healing marred the child's pale skin. Purples, yellows, faint greens. Some were fresh, others weeks old. Ellen drew in a sharp breath through her teeth, but forced her tone to stay calm. "You've been very brave," she said softly. "These are old hurts. You don't deserve them." Sophie didn't answer. She hugged Ranger tighter, pressing her cheek against his fur. The dog stayed perfectly still, only his eyes moving to meet Mark's with a look that seemed almost human, an unspoken demand to fix what had been broken. Mark swallowed hard. He crouched next to them, his hand resting lightly on Sophie's knee. "No one's going to hurt you again, not while Ranger and I are here." The girl blinked, a single tear sliding down her cheek, but she didn't speak. Ellen finished her examination gently, noting scratches along Sophie's legs, faint swelling on her wrist, and malnutrition signs, 2 thin arms, ribs showing beneath the fabric of her dress. She closed her bag with a quiet snap. "She's safe for tonight. But Mark, this child's been through hell." Mark's jaw tightened. "We'll find out who did it." Carla's eyes glistened, though her voice was steady. "I'll start running her name through the missing persons database." "Sophie Allen, you said?" The name hung heavy in the room. Sophie flinched at the sound of it, then quickly hid her face again. Mark knew pressing her now would do more harm than good. "Let her rest," he said quietly. "We'll take this one step at a time." For the next hour, the room was filled with silence. Mark sat nearby, paperwork untouched, simply watching the small figure curled against Ranger. The dog hadn't moved except to shift closer, his warm breath steady against Sophie's skin. Whenever someone stepped too near, Ranger's ears went rigid, and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest, a clear warning that he would not allow another fright to touch the girl. It was only when the station clock ticked past midnight that Sophie made a small sound. Not words, just a murmur, followed by the faintest brush of her fingers against Ranger's fur, as if testing whether the comfort was real. Ranger responded by licking her hand once, a slow, deliberate gesture. Sophie let out a shaky breath, the first sign of trust. Her small shoulders eased, and though her eyes remained wary, she did not flinch when Mark shifted in his chair. Mark caught Carla's gaze across the room. She gave a tiny nod. Progress, however fragile. Mark leaned forward, speaking in a voice just above a whisper. "You're safe here, Sophie. You don't have to talk until you're ready. Ranger will stay with you all night." For the first time since he had found her, Sophie looked up. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came, only a glance toward Ranger, then back to Mark. The message was clear enough. She trusted the dog first, the man second. And that was fine by Mark. Trust, even in small pieces, was something they could build on. As the night deepened, Sophie fell asleep against Ranger, her fingers still tangled in his fur. Mark sat watching, his mind already racing ahead. Who had done this? Where her mother was? What truth lay buried in the silence? But tonight was not for questions. Tonight was for keeping her safe. And in that quiet room, with a loyal shepherd acting as both pillow and guardian, Sophie's long road to healing had finally begun. The morning after a long night at the station broke gray and heavy. Clouds smudged across the sky like wet charcoal. Sergeant Mark Harris stood by his cruiser, sipping coffee that had gone cold before he noticed. Beside him, Ranger sat upright, ears alert, as if the dog too could feel the weight of the day. 7-year-old Sophie Allen walked timidly between them, her small hand resting against Ranger's thick fur. She hadn't said much since whispering her plea for help the night before, but she followed Mark's instructions without protest. Her thin frame was swallowed by an oversized sweatshirt Carla had found in the lost and found bin, the sleeves dangling well past her wrists. The bruises along her forearm peeked out despite her efforts to keep them hidden. Mark crouched to meet her eyes. "We're going to a place you stayed before, Sophie, the motel. I need you to show me your room. Is that okay?" Sophie hesitated, lips pressed tight, then gave a small nod. Ranger brushed his head against her side, as if confirming the choice. The Birchwood Motel sat off Route 17, a squat row of rooms painted a tired mustard yellow, its neon sign buzzing faintly even in daylight. Once, long ago, it might have served travelers and tourists, but now it was a stopover for people with nowhere else to go. The parking lot was cracked, weeds sprouting through the asphalt, and the curtains in most rooms hung lopsided or torn. Behind the counter sat Marty Alvarez, the motel manager. Marty was in his late 50s, thick-set with a sagging belly that pressed against his plaid shirt. His skin was the color of worn leather, sunburnt from years working odd jobs before the motel gig. A pencil-thin mustache shadowed his upper lip, and his eyes, brown but tired, shifted quickly as though always calculating who might cause trouble. Once, Marty had been a trucker, proud and restless, but a back injury ended that life. Now, bitterness edged his voice, though under it lay a reluctant kindness for children he often saw caught in ugly adult worlds. When Mark approached the desk, Marty frowned. "Back again, Harris? Thought last night was quiet." Mark leaned an elbow on the counter. "Looking for room 9B. Girl lived there with her mom." He nodded toward Sophie, who stood half hidden behind Ranger. Recognition flickered in Marty's eyes. He sighed. "Yeah, Catherine Allen. Nice lady, quiet. Came in about 2 months ago, fell behind on payments." His voice dropped. "Ambulance came for her couple days back. Haven't seen her since." Mark's jaw clenched. "Who called the ambulance?" Marty scratched his jaw. "Neighbor lady from 9A, I think. Saw her collapsed in the doorway. The guy she was with, Travis took off right after. Haven't seen him since either." At the name, Sophie stiffened. Her fingers dug into Ranger's fur. Ranger's ears twitched, his body tightening as if reading her fear. "Room still open?" Mark asked. "Yeah, but it's a mess." Mark pushed the logbook back across the counter. "Show me." The hallway smelled of mold and cigarette smoke. Room 9. B's door creaked open on rusted hinges, revealing a scene that made Mark's stomach turn. The carpet was stained, the air heavy with dampness. Clothes were stuffed into plastic bags. Trash littered the corners, and a thin mattress sagged beneath tangled sheets. Ranger immediately lowered his head, sniffing the floor with sharp precision. He moved with deliberate steps, weaving through the room, his nose twitching at every trace of scent. Mark watched as the dog paused by the closet, nostrils flaring. Ranger gave a low growl and pawed the corner where a scrap of fabric, part of a man's flannel shirt, was wedged beneath the door. Mark crouched, lifting the torn piece with a gloved hand. It was stiff with dried blood. Sophie stood near the dresser, eyes wide. Slowly, she opened the top drawer and pulled out a small, battered teddy bear. Its fur was matted, one button eye missing, but she hugged it tightly to her chest. From the same drawer, she produced a crumpled sheet of notebook paper, marked in uneven crayon strokes. A stick figure of a girl beside a larger figure labeled Mom, and beneath, shaky letters that read, "Please don't forget me." Mark's throat tightened. He knelt beside her. "You did good finding this, Sophie." She didn't answer, only clutched the bear tighter. Ranger patted over and licked her hand gently, drawing the faintest flicker of a smile across her face. A knock at the open door startled them. A woman with graying hair pulled into a bun stood in the hallway, holding a grocery bag. She wore a faded floral dress and sensible sneakers. Mrs. Helen Porter, Sophie's neighbor from room 9A, was in her early 60s, round-faced with soft wrinkles that deepened when she frowned. Widowed young, she had raised 2 children on her own, and the years had given her a tough but compassionate demeanor. She was known around the motel as the one who notices. "You the officer?" she asked, voice brisk but not unkind. Mark nodded. Sergeant Harris, you saw what happened? Helen clutched the bag tighter. Catherine Sophie's mama. She'd been sick for days, looked worn out, like she hadn't eaten right. I knocked when I heard shouting, found her collapsed, called 911 myself. She shook her head, lips pressed thin. That man she was with, Travis, worthless, always yelling, slamming doors. Soon as the ambulance came, he grabbed a bag and ran, didn't even ask about the girl. Sophie shrank further behind Ranger at the sound of the name. Ranger responded instantly, stepping forward with a low, protective bark that echoed in the narrow hall. Helen startled, then softened when she saw Sophie's pale face. "Oh, honey," she said gently, lowering her voice. "Don't you worry. Your mama's in good hands at the hospital. You stick with the officer here. He's a good one." Mark placed a steadying hand on Ranger's collar. "Thank you, ma'am. You've been more help than you know." Helen gave a sad smile. "That girl deserves better than what she's had." As they stepped back outside, Ranger tugged at the lead, nose lifted to the breeze. He pulled Mark toward the corner of the lot, where an old sedan sat half abandoned, its paint peeling, tires bald. The windows were fogged from moisture. Ranger circled once, then barked sharply, pawing at the driver's side. Mark bent down, shining his flashlight. On the ground near the wheel lay a discarded pack of cigarettes and a crushed beer can. But inside the car, through the grime, he saw something that made his pulse quicken, a set of keys on the seat and a wallet half shoved under it. "Good work, boy," Mark murmured. Ranger's bark had been no false alarm. The car might be their first real lead on Travis. Sophie clutched her teddy bear tighter, standing close to Ranger. For the first time, she spoke, her voice barely audible but clear. "That's his car." Mark looked at her, then at the vehicle, determination hardening his jaw. The trail was fresh, and now they had something to follow. The St. Joseph's Medical Center sat on the eastern edge of Willow Creek, a 3-story brick building with white trim and an entrance lined by tired rose bushes. Ambulances came and went, their sirens fading into the distance. Inside, the corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee, and the overhead lights were too bright, as if determined to chase every shadow away. Sergeant Mark Harris walked through the sliding doors, with Sophie Allen close to his side, her small hand still clutching the battered teddy bear. She wore the same oversized sweatshirt from the station, sleeves dragging, and her tangled hair had been brushed only enough to keep it out of her eyes. On the other side, Ranger, the German shepherd, walked with calm confidence, his lead slack, amber eyes scanning the crowd of nurses and visitors. The girl hadn't said a word on the ride. She sat quietly, holding Ranger's fur, her thin frame pressed against him, as if he were her anchor. Mark knew the silence wasn't emptiness. It was armor. Behind the front desk sat Nurse Brenda Collins, a woman in her early 40s with a sturdy frame and warm, dark eyes. Her curly black hair was tied back neatly, and her scrubs were patterned with sunflowers. Brenda had been a nurse for nearly 2 decades, and she was known for balancing stern efficiency with motherly kindness. Patients often said she could scold you and comfort you in the same breath. "Sergeant Harris," she greeted, recognition sparking in her eyes. "What brings you here?" Mark lowered his voice. "Catherine Allen, brought in 2 nights ago. Is she still here?" Brenda's face softened with concern. "Room 214, 2nd floor, still unconscious but stable." She leaned over the desk to look at Sophie, who half hid behind Ranger. "And this must be her little girl." Sophie pressed closer to Ranger at the attention, her eyes wary. Ranger responded by stepping slightly in front of her, tail low but protective. Brenda smiled gently. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Your mama's just upstairs." The elevator ride was silent except for the hum of machinery. Sophie stood between Mark and Ranger, squeezing her teddy bear so tightly the seams strained. When the doors opened onto the 2nd floor, they stepped into a quieter hallway. Nurses moved like ghosts, their shoes whispering against the tiles. The steady beep of heart monitors echoed from behind half-closed doors. Room 214 lay at the end of the hall. Mark pushed the door open softly. Inside, Catherine Allen lay in the bed, pale against the white sheets. She was in her early 30s, but looked older, worn down by exhaustion and hardship. Her light brown hair was tangled and limp across the pillow, her face gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath skin that had lost its color. Faint bruises marred her arms, visible even beneath the hospital gown. An IV line ran into her hand, and the monitor beside the bed traced the rhythm of her fragile heartbeat. Sophie froze in the doorway. Her eyes widened, her lips trembling as though she wasn't sure whether to run forward or stay rooted. Mark crouched beside her. "That's your mom, Sophie. She's resting right now. The doctors are helping her get better." Sophie's grip on Ranger tightened, but then she stepped forward, almost stumbling to the bedside. She reached for her mother's hand thin, cold, and whispered, "Mama." Catherine didn't stir, but her chest rose and fell steadily. Ranger lowered himself onto the floor near the bed, curling protectively at Sophie's feet. His head rested on his paws, but his eyes remained alert, fixed on the door, as though guarding the room from unseen threats. A moment later, Dr. Samuel Price entered. He was in his early 60s, tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and wire-rimmed glasses. His once black hair was now silver, combed carefully back. Years of practice had given him an air of calm authority, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that betrayed the compassion beneath his professional exterior. He had chosen to remain in a small-town hospital, despite offers from larger cities. After losing his own wife to illness years ago, he had devoted himself to caring for families in places often overlooked. "Sergeant Harris," Dr. Price said, nodding, "and this must be Sophie." He softened his tone. "Your mother's very brave, young lady." Sophie looked up, but didn't respond. Ranger gave a quiet chuff, as if acknowledging the doctor's words. Dr. Price turned to Mark. Catherine Allen was admitted with internal injuries consistent with repeated trauma. Malnourished, dehydrated. She'd been trying to hold herself together far too long. His voice tightened, though he kept it controlled. "We also found records. She attempted to file for a protective order a month ago. It was denied due to insufficient evidence." Mark's jaw clenched. "Travis?" The doctor nodded grimly. "I don't know the details, but whoever he is, she was afraid of him." Sophie's shoulders hunched at the name, confirming what Mark already suspected. They stayed in the room for nearly an hour. Sophie sat by the bed, humming softly to her teddy bear, as though singing to her mother through it. Mark remained close, listening to the hum of the monitors, his hand occasionally brushing Ranger's head in silent reassurance. At one point, Nurse Brenda returned with a small tray. "Apple juice for the young one," she said warmly, setting it on the table. She crouched to Sophie's level. "Drink this, sweetheart. It'll help." Sophie hesitated, glancing at Ranger first. When the shepherd nudged her gently with his nose, she finally took the cup and sipped. It was a small victory, but one Mark noted carefully. As they prepared to leave, Sophie leaned down, pressing her cheek gently against her mother's arm. "I'll come back, Mama," she whispered. Ranger stood, ears flicking, and nudged her shoulder, as if promising to hold her to that vow. In the hallway, Mark placed a hand on Sophie's back. "We'll check on her again soon. Right now, we need to find Travis." Ranger's ears pricked at the name, his muscles tightening. Sophie clutched her bear closer, her silence speaking louder than any words. Mark knew the truth had only just begun to reveal itself, but it was enough to fuel his determination. Somewhere out there, Travis was running, and with Ranger at his side and Sophie's trust slowly growing, Mark swore he would not let the man escape justice. The woods behind Willow Creek had always been a place of quiet. Pines stood like ancient sentries, their branches whispering secrets to each other, and the ground was carpeted in pine needles that muffled every step. On most days, hikers wandered here, or kids built forts from fallen branches. But this morning, the forest felt different, charged, as though holding its breath. Sergeant Mark Harris moved steadily along the trail, his boots crunching against damp earth. Ranger, his German shepherd partner, trotted at his side, nose twitching at every scent, ears flicking forward like radar. Behind them, Deputy Carla Jensen followed, her auburn hair tied back beneath her cap, her freckled face serious. She carried a notepad, though her other hand rested lightly on the holster at her hip. Earlier that day, a call had come from a hunter who claimed he saw a man matching Travis's description near the old logging roads. Mark had felt his chest tighten when he heard it. Travis. The name that sent Sophie shrinking behind Ranger, the man who had left Catherine bruised and broken, was somewhere close. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Birds hushed. Even the wind seemed to hold still between the trees. Ranger paused often, sniffing, tail stiff with concentration. Then, with a sharp tug, He veered off the main path, leading them toward a cluster of cedar trees. Mark followed, his hand brushing the grip of his sidearm. Carla glanced at him. "You think he's here?" "Ranger thinks so," Mark replied. "That's enough for me." They reached a small clearing. An old fire pit lay in the center, filled with half-burned logs and the faint smell of smoke. Ranger lowered his head, sniffing, then barked once, a deep, commanding sound that echoed through the trees. Mark scanned the perimeter. "Show me, boy." The shepherd moved to a thicket at the clearing's edge, pushing through brambles. Mark crouched to look. There, half hidden beneath leaves, lay a crumpled jacket. He pulled it free. Stained flannel, the same pattern as the bloodied scrap from the motel. Carla's eyes narrowed. "He's been camping out here." Mark's jaw set. "Not far then." A twig snapped behind them. Instantly, Ranger's head jerked up, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Mark spun, drawing his weapon. From the shadow of the trees stepped a man, tall, wiry, with greasy blonde hair falling into his face. His beard was patchy, jaw sharp, and his clothes were ragged, dirt ground into the fabric. His eyes, pale and restless, darted between Mark and Carla before landing on Ranger. There was no mistaking the tension in them, paranoia sharpened by guilt. Travis Miller. He raised his hand slowly, though his smirk made the gesture feel anything but peaceful. "Well, look who found me, the cop with his fancy dog." His voice carried a rasp, as if too many cigarettes had burned the edges of it. Mark's stance didn't waver. "Travis Miller, you left Catherine Allen in a hospital bed. You abandoned her daughter. You're coming with us." Travis's laugh was bitter, edged with defiance. "Catherine, she was weak, always dragging me down. I did what I had to." Carla's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. Ranger growled, the sound low and deadly, vibrating through the clearing. Mark took a step forward. "You hurt a woman and a child. That's not strength, that's cowardice." Travis's pale eyes flicked to the trees, calculating escape. "You don't get it, do you? That kid, she's not mine. Not my responsibility. None of this is." Ranger surged forward with a sharp bark, teeth flashing. Mark held him back with the lead, though his own patience frayed. "You're done running, Travis. Come quietly, or you'll regret it." For a heartbeat, the woods froze. Then Travis lunged not toward Mark, but sideways, diving into the trees. "Ranger track," Mark barked. The shepherd shot forward, lead slipping free. His body became a streak of muscle and precision, weaving through branches. Carla and Mark sprinted after, branches whipping at their faces, the forest alive with the pounding of pursuit. Travis ran with desperation, crashing through undergrowth, breath ragged, but Ranger was faster. Within seconds, the shepherd leapt, knocking the man off balance. Travis fell hard onto the forest floor, cursing as Ranger stood over him, teeth bared in warning. Mark arrived, gun raised. "Don't move!" Pinned beneath Ranger's weight, Travis froze, chest heaving. His bravado cracked, sweat slicked his brow, and his smirk vanished. "Call him off!" he spat, fear finally creeping into his voice. Mark approached slowly, cuffs ready. "You had your chance." He clipped the cuffs onto Travis's wrists with practiced efficiency, then tugged Ranger back. The dog retreated obediently, though his gaze never left the man. Carla exhaled, shaking her head. "Nice work, Ranger." She patted the shepherd's flank as he trotted past, tail high, pride radiating from his stance. They marched Travis back to the clearing, his wrists bound, his eyes darting wildly like a trapped animal. He muttered curses under his breath, but every time Ranger growled softly, he fell silent. Mark looked at him once more, voice steady. "Sophie doesn't have to be afraid anymore. Catherine will have the chance to heal. That's what matters now." For the first time, Travis had no reply. As they led him out of the woods, Ranger trotted ahead, guiding the way like a sentinel. His role wasn't just protector anymore. He had become the thread binding a broken family back toward hope. And for the first time in days, Mark felt the weight in his chest lift just slightly. The fight wasn't over, but the worst of the darkness had finally stepped into the light. The sun had just slipped below the horizon when Sergeant Mark Harris parked his cruiser outside St. Joseph's Medical Center once more. The sky glowed a dusky lavender, the kind of color that promised calm after storm. Yet Mark's chest was heavy with anticipation. Tonight was different. Catherine Allen, who had lain silent in her hospital bed for days, had opened her eyes. Beside him in the passenger seat, Ranger sat upright, tail swishing against the leather seat as if he too sensed the gravity of the evening. In the back, 7-year-old Sophie Allen clutched her teddy bear, her small fingers knotted into the worn fabric. She looked nervous, her lips pursed as though she were afraid to hope too much. Mark turned slightly. "She's awake, Sophie. Your mama's been waiting to see you." Sophie glanced at him, then at Ranger, who stretched his neck across the seat to nuzzle her hand. She managed a tiny nod. Inside the hospital, the corridors buzzed softly with activity. A nurse pushed a cart of linens past, the wheels squeaking, while a doctor in a white coat disappeared into an exam room. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and brewed tea. Nurse Brenda Collins, the sunflower-scrubbed nurse who had guided them days before, greeted them at the elevator. Her warm smile instantly eased Sophie's tension. "There you are," Brenda said gently, crouching to Sophie's level. "Your mama's been asking for you, sweetheart." Sophie's eyes widened. She asked?" Brenda nodded firmly. First words out of her mouth were about you. For the first time, Sophie's face lit with something fragile but bright hope. They entered room 214. The lights were dimmed to a soft glow, and the steady rhythm of the monitor filled the silence. On the bed, Catherine Allen lay propped against pillows. Her brown hair had been brushed, though it still hung in weary strands. Her face, though pale, had regained some color. Her hazel eyes flicked instantly to the doorway, and when she saw Sophie, they brimmed with tears. "Sophie!" Catherine's voice cracked, barely more than a whisper, but filled with longing. Sophie froze at the threshold, torn between relief and fear. She had seen her mother broken, unconscious, unreachable. Now she was awake, fragile but alive. Mark crouched beside her. "Go on," he murmured. Ranger pressed his head into Sophie's side, pushing her forward gently. The little girl took a trembling step, then another, until she was at her mother's bedside. She climbed carefully onto the chair, then onto the bed, slipping into Catherine's arms as though she belonged nowhere else. Tears rolled down Catherine's face as she held her daughter tight, whispering, "I'm here, baby, I'm here." Ranger curled at the foot of the bed, laying his head across Catherine's blanket. His amber eyes blinked slowly, as though satisfied the family was whole again. After a long while, Catherine looked at Mark. Her voice was raspy but steady. "Thank you, Sergeant, for finding her, for keeping her safe." Mark shook his head. "It wasn't just me. Ranger deserves just as much credit." At his name, Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking. Catherine reached down weakly to stroke the thick fur at his neck. "Then thank you, Ranger. You saved my little girl." Sophie smiled faintly for the first time in days, clutching both her mother's hand and Ranger's ear, as if holding them together could keep the moment forever. Later, when Sophie had drifted into a light doze against her mother's side, Catherine spoke quietly to Mark. Travis, he did this." Mark's expression hardened. "We know. He's in custody now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Catherine closed her eyes in relief, though pain lingered in the lines of her face. "I tried to get away, tried to protect her. I even filed for a protective order, but—" Her voice trailed off. Mark nodded. "We found the record. You weren't ignored. You just didn't have enough proof for the system, but now we do." Her eyes met his, weary but resolute. "Then don't let him hurt her again." Mark's hand rested lightly on the bedrail. "I won't. That's a promise." Over the next days, Catherine regained strength. With therapy and steady care, her voice grew stronger, her steps steadier. Sophie stayed close, always within arm's reach, as if afraid her mother might vanish again. And Ranger, ever watchful, became their silent guardian. He sat by Sophie's side when she colored pictures to hang by the bed. He followed Catherine when she took her first hesitant walk down the hall. Nurses often paused to smile, whispering how lucky they were to have such a dog. One afternoon, Sophie drew a picture of the three of them, her mother, and Ranger standing tall beside them. She handed it to Mark shyly. "It's our family," she said softly. Mark's throat tightened. He pinned it to the bulletin board beside Catherine's bed. When Catherine was finally discharged, Mark drove them to a small cottage arranged by social services, just a few blocks from the station, where he could keep watch. It wasn't much, peeling paint, creaky floors. But it was safe, and for Sophie, it was enough. That night, they sat together on the porch, Catherine in the rocking chair, pale but smiling. Sophie curled on the steps with her teddy bear. Ranger lay stretched across the porch like a sentinel, his ears twitching at every night sound. Mark stood leaning against the railing, watching them. For the first time in weeks, peace felt possible. The cottage on Maple Street was nothing grand, just a small weathered home with peeling white paint and a yard fenced in by crooked posts. The porch sagged in the middle, and the shutters had lost their color years ago. Yet to Sophie Allen, it felt like a castle. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she could walk through a doorway without fear. No shouting, no slammed fists, no shadows of a man she dreaded. Mark Harris had pulled strings at social services, and with the help of the department, the cottage was arranged as a temporary safe haven. It was close to the police station, close enough that he could drive by each morning and evening. He had even stopped at the hardware store, buying paint cans he swore he'd help with when he had time. As the cruiser pulled up, Sophie pressed her forehead to the window, clutching her teddy bear. Ranger sat beside her in the back seat, tail sweeping across the leather seat. When Mark opened the door, the German Shepherd bounded out first, paws landing firmly on the grass, nose lifted as he scanned the surroundings. Satisfied, he turned back with a short bark, as if announcing the territory safe. Sophie giggled softly, her first real laugh in days. Catherine Allen stepped carefully from the car, her body still recovering. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her face tired but more alive than before. She placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "What do you think, Sophie?" Sophie looked up, her blue eyes wide. "It's ours?" Mark smiled faintly. "For now, yes. A place to start fresh." The girl hesitated only a moment before running to the porch steps. She climbed them quickly, teddy bear in one hand, Ranger bounding after her. The shepherd pressed his nose against the door, tail wagging, waiting for someone to open it. Mark handed Catherine the keys. She unlocked the door slowly, pushing it open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and pine cleaner, but sunlight poured through the windows. A small sofa sat in the corner, a round table in the kitchen, 2 bedrooms with clean sheets folded neatly on the beds. Simple, but safe. Sophie darted inside, her laughter echoing off the bare walls. Ranger trotted after, exploring every corner. He sniffed the couch, inspected the kitchen, then padded into the back bedroom, where he circled once before. Lying down as though claiming it, Catherine leaned against the doorway, tears pricking her eyes. "I never thought we'd have something like this again." Mark stood beside her. "It's not perfect, but it's yours. And you won't be alone anymore." Over the next days, the house filled with small signs of life. Sophie drew pictures and taped them on the fridge crayon sketches of her mother, and Ranger standing together beneath a sun. Catherine found strength to cook simple meals, though Sophie and Ranger often ended up sharing toast on the porch, crumbs scattered across the boards. The neighbors, curious at first, soon became friends. Mrs. Dolores Carter, a retired teacher with silver hair always pinned neatly in a bun, lived across the street. She was round in figure, brisk in voice, but her heart was generous. She arrived one morning with a basket of muffins and a second-hand storybook, telling Sophie she had once taught her mother's class in school. Sophie blushed, hiding behind Ranger, but slowly warmed to the gentlewoman's laughter. On another evening, Tom Bennett, the mailman, stopped by. Tom was a tall man in his 50s, with a kind smile and a limp from an old knee injury. He crouched down to scratch Ranger's ears, chuckling when the dog leaned into him. "Good watchdog you got here," he said to Sophie. "Nobody's getting past this fella." Sophie grinned proudly, as though Ranger's loyalty was hers alone to claim. But the past still lingered like a shadow. At night, Sophie sometimes woke crying, clutching her teddy bear. Ranger would leap onto her bed, curling around her until she drifted back to sleep. Catherine, too, carried scars. She jumped at sudden noises, her body stiffening at footsteps in the hall. Yet each time, Mark reminded her, Travis was in custody, facing charges, and he wouldn't walk free again. One evening, Catherine sat on the porch with Mark as Sophie played in the yard, tossing a ball for Ranger. The shepherd bounded after it with joyful energy, ears flapping, his powerful body a blur of motion. Sophie's laughter rang like music, breaking the silence of the neighborhood. "She's smiling again," Catherine whispered, voice trembling. Mark nodded. "Because she has you and him." He nodded toward Ranger. Catherine looked at the dog, who stood proudly with the ball in his jaws before dropping it at Sophie's feet. "He's more than a dog. He's family." Mark's gaze softened. That's what he was trained for, to protect, to give trust when humans sometimes fail. Catherine studied him for a moment. "And you, Sergeant Harris? What do you call yourself in this story?" Mark chuckled lightly. "Just the guy who drove the car." But deep down, Catherine knew better. The summer settled in. The paint on the shutters was touched up with the help of neighbors. Flowers were planted by Sophie and Mrs. Carter, and Ranger dug a hole under the porch he claimed as his cool resting spot. The cottage slowly transformed, not perfect, but alive. One afternoon, Sophie held out a drawing to Mark. This one showed not 3 figures, but 4, herself, her mother, Ranger, and Mark standing tall beside them. Across the top, in crooked letters, she had written, "Our family." Mark blinked, caught off guard. Sophie pressed the paper into his hand, smiling shyly. "You belong here too," she whispered. Ranger barked once, as if agreeing. For a long moment, Mark couldn't speak. Then he crouched down, ruffling her hair. "Thank you, Sophie. That means more than you know." As twilight fell that evening, Catherine tucked Sophie into bed, the teddy bear snug under her arm. Ranger lay at the foot of the bed, eyes half shut but watchful. Catherine brushed a kiss across her daughter's forehead. "Good night, baby," Sophie murmured sleepily. "Good night, Mama. Good night, Ranger." The dog thumped his tail once in reply. When Catherine stepped back into the hall, she found Mark waiting by the door, hat in hand. "She's safe now," he said softly. Catherine nodded. "Thanks to you both." Outside, the stars blinked over Willow Creek, quiet and eternal. Inside the cottage, laughter had returned, trust was being rebuilt, and a broken family had begun to heal. Ranger stretched out on the porch that night, amber eyes watching over the little home. For him, there was no higher calling, no greater reward than this. Sometimes, in the darkest nights, God sends us a light we do not expect. For Sophie, it was not gold or riches, but the steady heartbeat of a German shepherd who refused to leave her side, and the hand of a police officer who chose compassion over duty alone. This story is more than rescue. It is a reminder that miracles often come quietly, through courage, love, and faith. And perhaps Ranger, with his unwavering loyalty, was one of those small miracles sent by the Lord to remind us. No child is ever truly forgotten. No soul is ever too lost for hope to find them. As we return to our own daily lives, filled with struggles, routines, and quiet prayers, may we carry this truth in our hearts. God still works in mysterious ways, through the kindness of strangers, through the innocence of children, and yes, sometimes through the devotion of a dog. May the Lord bless you and your family tonight. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories of love, redemption, and faith. Together, let's keep the light of compassion burning.